How are you doing? My name is Micheal Lu. Today, I'm glad to have this opportunity to be able to present to you some of my understanding about all these recent NFT issues.
Yep, we're back again. So this is Micheal. This is kind of like our episode 1.2 because 1.1, remember, we recorded it, but we're still debating whether or not we want to put it online, right? But 1.2, we're going to be talking about NFTs because Micheal just recently gave a lecture at Soochow University in downtown Taipei, and he gave a riveting talk on what
I sure
NFTs
hope so.
It was quite engaging. But so we're going to condense a little bit of that talk and then put it into this podcast for everybody, right?
I pick up this topic knowing that this topic has been very hot recently, not just in Taiwan, but all over the world. Knowing that the NFT transaction is kind of 24 hours global transaction. You can buy, sell NFTs around the clock without limitations being set on where are you located, so that it has been widely discussed issue, which in my opinion has created some of the confusion in how is it we should make transactions on NFTs, how much of a protection I need to have before I start thinking about doing that, or whether there are even legal protection at the moment on the relevant issues, on the relevant transaction to be engaged. All in all, which give me some inspiration in terms of the fact that I have some legal background, knowing that what kind of legal exposures could have been placed on the persons who start to conduct these transactions.
Right.
Although, laws in this particular field are not that clear, and they're in the progress of developing themselves. So we don't know what will happen, let's say, for example, 1 or 2 years or 10 years from now. But there have been cases being brought in the U.S. so that we can take a look at these cases as an observer to make some prediction as to find out where the trends are in terms of what the laws will say when there are issues to come up.
Right, great introduction, Micheal. So let's just backtrack a little bit. So if you were to explain to someone what an NFT is, very simply, how would you define it?
Okay. NFT, but they're actually different definitions, and different people are giving different definitions to the NFT. The most typical definition you could find is that NFT is a non-fungible token. Okay, non-fungible token. What does that mean? Okay, and what does that mean from a business point of view, and what does that mean from a legal point of view, which could create a huge gap between the two of them. Knowing that, so we would just say that an NFT is a non-fungible token. Basically, we means that you can't buy an NFT with another NFT because one NFT and another NFT are not exchangeable. It's not like the situation where you have one US dollar and another US dollar. They are the same. So you can change one US dollar with another US dollar, but you can't, at least at the moment, you can change your NFT with another NFT of the same kind, so that it becomes a kind of a non-fungible token.
Right. So one of a kind, unique.
That's basically what they say. One of a kind, unique.
That NFTs are worth purchasing or worth investing in, or just for the pleasure of owning, because they believe it's intrinsically valuable because it's non-fungible. So would it be fair to say that this is where the appeal of NFTs lie, or this is what's appealing to people about NFTs?
Okay, not quite, not necessarily in terms of whether or not it is intrinsically valuable. Okay, by comparison, an NFT could be a stamp, a piece of stamp in the real world. You collect this stamp. Sometimes you even think the price of the stamp will go up as the time goes by, but in most cases they don't. Okay, so if you ask me, I would say all those NFT products, 90% of them, okay, maybe I should mention, it's really hard to quantify. You should see them as something that is collectible, because it is in the case of an NFT, it's a collectible digital, just like it's a collectible stamp or a collectible painting or a collectible baseball card in the real world. Some of them the price of some of them will go up eventually, okay, but most of them perhaps not. But it really depends on how do you feel about all these collectibles, and in terms of their value at the present, in the past, or in the future. But from my perspective, I would say maybe 10%. Maybe 10%, just like any famous painting that was made in the 18th century, in the 19th century by some of the best painters we know in the 21st century. But there had been paintings that were made by thousands of painters in the 17th century, 18th century, who were not famous, much less the paintings that they had created while they were alive. I think that's the comparison I could give in response to your question.
Right. So now that we've established sort of the definition of NFTs, the main focus of today's talk is really the legal challenges involved, because we're looking at it from a legal perspective. Some challenges involved with buying, trading, regulating NFTs. So in a couple of weeks ago when I attended your lecture, you mentioned some of those legal challenges. So would you mind walking us through one or two of those legal challenges and maybe give us a specific case, just as an example?
Thank you. I'd be happy to. Legal framework, legal protection. Basically, at the moment, they're not in existence. In other words, there are no, in my opinion, legal protection when you try to buy or sell NFTs on the internet. But of course, legally you can, you can have some protection. For example, when you buy an NFT from the original minter of the NFT, because the guy sells you the NFT on the what we call primary market. So you know who is it that is selling the NFT to you. So in terms of all those conditions being made, or stipulations being made under the transaction, some of them have been written in a written contract, which more than likely are printed on the website, of the seller as the minter of the NFT product, selling you this NFT on the primary market. So if there is a breach of contract, and if there is a breach of condition, okay, you can go back to look at the terms being specified in the contract you have with the seller of the NFT. For that part, you to a certain degree have some protection based on the terms being agreed to by you and the seller. However, if it is in the secondary market,
that's where the problems start arising.
You basically you have no protection in the sense that you don't even know who the seller was, and the seller doesn't know who the buyer was. So you have this situation. Even you have all kinds of problems, breach of warranty, breach of so on and so forth, fraudulent representation, all those things that may come up when there is a dispute to arise under any specific transaction in the real world. There's no one you can turn to seek remedy based on a contract violation. So there's no protection. But this is basically what is so special about the NFTs being made, because it is being transacted allegedly in a decentralized world. When we say decentralized, it means basically there are no rules, no courts, no lawyers, no people you can turn to, and no people, you don't even know who they are. You don't know who as the parties of the transaction.
Right. So one of the most interesting things you discussed during your lecture at Soochow was the case between Miramax and Quentin Tarantino. Could you tell us a little bit about this case, because it's very interesting?
Okay. Legally, it's not complicated. Okay, but it's an interesting case in the sense that, okay, if you let's assume that you are the buyer of the NFT published by Quentin Tarantino through this particular what did they call that?
Manuscript. I think he basically, what happened there was he wanted to sell some handwritten notes on the Pulp Fiction manuscript. Right. And he wanted to make that as an NFT to sell to the highest bidder, right? On auction.
Right. On the internet.
Right.
On the internet. But the interesting part of this case is that basically, according to the plaintiff, who is Miramax, suing Quentin Tarantino, saying basically that you have no right to sell that because all the right are associated with this particular NFT you have made belong to Miramax. Okay, based on the contract between Quentin Tarantino and the Miramax, saying in that particular contract, Miramax alleges that Quentin Tarantino has transferred all the rights associated with the movie to Miramax, except for a few things.
So in short, Miramax feels that those are its properties, right? Including the script, including many parts, anything associated with the movie Pulp Fiction. That's how Miramax feels. Right. So, yes, please go on. Yeah.
So therefore, the interesting part of the entire scenario is that, what if anyone, as the buyer of this particular NFT sold by Quentin Tarantino, what exactly does he or she get by paying lots of money to Quentin Tarantino, knowing that someone, a third party, has alleged that the seller doesn't have anything to sell? So what is it that the buyer
is actually
would get by paying so much money? So if he doesn't have any right, if there it is determined that Quentin Tarantino didn't have any right on this particular NFT, then who is it? what are you supposed to do to get your money back? Okay, or if we put another, if we stretch this scenario even further to the extent, what if he sells, see already, before anything goes, before everything comes out, he has already sold the same thing to another person. Okay, so this is something we really have to look into in terms of what is it that a buyer can buy or a buyer can get from paying some money for the purchase of the NFT. In terms of for this particular case, it is a handwritten scripture made by Quentin Tarantino,
right?
Okay, and some of the director cuts, okay, made by Quentin Tarantino, which he alleged that he has the right to make it into the NFT and sell them because he has saved or reserved such rights in his contract with Miramax. So from that part, in terms of the buyer, can you reproduce the content of the NFT sold by Quentin Tarantino to you? We don't know that unless your contract with Quentin Tarantino says very clearly you not only get the ownership of the NFT, you also get the copyright. So
interesting.
you can resell them, you can also reproduce them, but most likely, perhaps not.
I see. So,
it's like buying a book.
Right.
Okay. You buy a book from a bookstore. You get the ownership to the book, but you don't get the right to reproduce the content of the book unless otherwise authorized by the author.
Right. I see. So these are some of the legal challenges, some pitfalls, some gray areas that are still being worked out and resolved, right?
In this case, this is not difficult in the sense that if you are buying it directly from Quentin Tarantino on the primary market, so that there will be some terms applicable governing the nature of the transaction in terms of the rights and duties of each party under the contract or under the transaction, but things will become quite differently when you try to resell it on the secondary market.
Also, when Miramax enters the picture here, because if it was a direct transaction between Quentin Tarantino and said buyer, then it's a lot more direct, everything is a lot clearer. But because Miramax is involved, suddenly there's a lot of issues that come out.
What may happen, okay, in terms of litigation, okay, what may happen is that if Tarantino continues to sell and somebody actually buys the product, buys the NFT to assert its right, okay, as he has, Miramax has alleged. If I were the lawyer, I would suggest suing both Quentin Tarantino and the buyer, because in that case you are no longer a good faith buyer, knowing that we have given due notice to everyone, okay, under the situation, so that you cannot characterize yourself as a bona fide buyer of the NFT to be exempt from any further obligations to which Miramax, if he wins the case, being imposed on the seller.
So I see. So finally, before we move on from this example, that's why a lot of legal scholars and lawyers are following this case, right? Because they, depending on the outcome of this case, it will set the legal precedent for future cases, right? So people are following this very closely.
Of course, but this case most likely, I would say, will settle one way or the other, because afterwards, it's all about money. It's kind of basically a business transaction, which can always be settled
I see. So for our viewers out there, there are other examples that you can perhaps Google yourself and look it up. There's the top NBA Top Shot moments. You can Google that up. You can also look at Dapper Labs.
Right.
That's also an interesting example that they can look into. Okay, so this is all well and good. I think we've been getting questions also from the common man that wants to know, NFTs are all well and good, but is this something that I as a common man can be involved with, or is this a plaything of rich people? Is it the exclusive zone of rich people?
Okay, it's a game. Okay, it's all about money. Okay, and it's so that it can be played by anyone. Okay, ordinary people, common people, or rich people, and most likely, based on my understanding of the current situation, everybody is interested. Everybody is involved. Okay, or everybody is about to be involved in a transaction, expecting some profits to be gained by or through such a kind of investment. Just like when you try to buy a baseball card, okay, baseball card for your own collection. But if the price is right, you can of course sell it to gain a profit. So not just rich people. I mean, ordinary people, I think, are thinking about getting into the game.
Yeah. Because I remember also during the lecture, you mentioned very explicitly to the audience that today's lecture is not about telling you whether you should or should not buy NFTs, but you're just analyzing some of the conditions and risks involved from a legal standpoint regarding NFTs, right? But as to whether or not people want to purchase NFTs, that's entirely up to them.
Of course, that's true. That's absolutely true. Okay, so what I'm trying to say that in terms of the legal exposures, unless it is a primary market that you buy an NFT from, and in that particular scenario, you could get some legal protection based on your contract with the seller as the minter of the NFT. But even that, you may have problems because you know that all those contracts have been specifically designed for the protection of the seller, so that even you try to read them through, which is not an easy thing to do, and understand the scope of duties or rights on both parties, you will still not be able to protect yourself to the full extent, knowing that all those terms have been drafted for the protection of the seller and not the buyer. Not to mention the situation when it comes to the secondary market in terms of who the buyers and who the buyers are, who the sellers are. You just don't know all such information, which is absolutely required when you try to seek remedy when being jeopardized in terms of your rights under the NFT that you have bought or you have sold.
Very interesting. Okay, so I remember the last slide during your presentation. It's a very good summary too. NFTs, it's a jungle out there. It sounds to me like any types of investment or transaction, there are inherent risks involved. There are some protection, at least it seems to me, if it's a first line transaction, but when it's a secondary market, seems to be a little bit more complicated and there are more risks. Okay, right?
Okay. NFT is something that is absolutely required when it comes to all the activities to be conducted or to be transacted in the metaverse. Okay, metaverse is basically a 3D internet environment, and people will conduct all kinds of activities, just like the situation we are with the 2D internet environment. the situation is basically the same. However, there will be lots of interesting things to develop in that metaverse, including transaction, and monetary activities, things being sold and things being bought. But however, you gotta have the NFT to become a certificate or constitute a certificate of ownership to be able to buy or sell this particular subject.
That's the key, right?
Okay, in this 3D internet world to come 10 years or 20 years from now. So this is important. However, because of this, at the moment, the exposures are high in the sense that the legal protections are not sufficient. Okay, people basically have no protection when it comes to fraud or misrepresentation or even coercion. Okay, so for all those things that are quite important for the protection of the buyer in the real world, and those things are not in existence in this metaverse. So on the one hand, this is I would say critical and is absolutely required to conduct business, conduct transaction in this metaverse to come. On the other hand, since it is in terms of the value of the future of the NFT being transacted right now, they are also very speculative.
Right.
Okay, so it is a combination of what is absolutely required and what is absolutely speculative, which could lead to I would say high exposures financially or even legally.
Buy at your own risk. So you touched upon some of the predictions actually already. You talked about the 3D internet, you talked about the metaverse, you also talked about how most likely a lot of the examples out there are going to be settled, right? In a sense that they're just going to settle. For example, Miramax and Quentin Tarantino. So before we wrap up, what are some of the other predictions you might have for NFTs? And also personally, what would you like to see happen? Would you like to see more protection out there for buyers? What would you like to see happen?
From a lawyer's perspective, of course, I sure hope that there will be more protection, for the protection of people who want to conduct normal business on internet, knowing that at the most it's not going to be easy, because in terms of this NFT transaction, it is supposed to be decentralized. So on the one hand, the very nature of the transaction is supposed to be decentralized. On the other hand, you also know that the transactions are simply not protected by law. So you have this two contradictory extremes coexisting at the same time in this man-made world. So in terms of what's going to happen, I would say a majority of the NFT being transacted on the market through internet will fail.
Wow.
And people, except for a few, I don't know how many, a few key players, most of the people doing this most likely will lose money.
Wow.
So therefore I would say, to summarize what I have said thus far, it's a jungle out there. Be careful to make sure that your investment, if it fails, will not hurt you or will not hurt your family or your long-term goal in your life. So you can give it a try, but don't make it something that is so serious to the extent that if you lose, you're going to lose your entire
life savings.
That's not a smart thing to do, knowing that basically it's a jungle out there with no legal protection.
Right.
But however, this business pattern will survive, will continue because there are technologies involved. In terms of the business patterns, most of them survive because there are technologies involved and then to be developed, to be upgraded, and to be made better by those people who have such technological abilities, such as the big enterprises that we are familiar with at the moment onto the internet's market. Apple,
Meta, not Facebook anymore.
Meta, Google's, they are actually the survivors. They are the survivors of the things being left behind from the year 2000 after internet crash. So the same thing may happen again. That the history repeats itself. Let's see what happens.
There will be another culling, basically.
So the market could crash, but there are smart people who will survive eventually because there are technologies involved to be developed.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's been an interesting afternoon. For our viewers, we will also upload the video of Michael's lecture at Soochow University. You can check that out if you want to dive more in depth. However, it's in Chinese. So apologies in advance to our viewers who can't understand Mandarin. Okay, well, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you in our next episode.